Lesson 7 for August 10 to 16, Jesus and Those in Need, read by Dr. Percy Harold. Tuesday, August 13, Jesus Heals. The Gospels are peppered with the stories of Jesus' miracles, particularly those of healing. As Isaiah had prophesied, he healed the blind and released those who had been held captive by disease, sometimes after many years of suffering. For example, in Mark chapter 5, verses 24 to 34, "So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, 'If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well.' Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, 'Who touched my clothes?' But his disciples said to him, 'You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, Who touched me?' And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, and be healed of your affliction.' And in John chapter 5, verses 1 through 15. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first, after the stirring of the water, was made well of whatever disease he had. Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, and knew that he had already been in that condition a long time, he said to him, 'Do you want to be made well?' And the sick man answered him, 'Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, others step down before me.' Jesus said to him, 'Rise, take up your bed, and walk.' And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed, and walked. And that day was the Sabbath. The Jews therefore said to him who was cured, 'It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed.' He answered them, 'He who made me well said to me, Take up your bed, and walk.' Then they asked him, 'Who was the man who said to you, Take up your bed, and walk?' But the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. Afterward Jesus found him in the temple, and said to him, 'See, you have been made worse. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you.' The man departed, and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. But he did more than this. He made the lame walk again. He healed lepers, not just by word, but by touching them, unclean though they were. He confronted demons who were possessing people's minds and bodies. And he even raised the dead. We might expect these miracles to have been about attracting crowds and proving his powers to his many doubters and critics. But this was not always the case. Instead, often Jesus gave instructions to the person healed not to tell anyone about it. While it seems the just healed people were unlikely to follow these instructions and keep their wonderful news to themselves, Jesus was trying to show that his miracles were about something more significant than a spectacle. The ultimate goal, of course, was for the people to receive salvation in him. Yet the healing miracles of Jesus were an expression of his compassion. For example, in the lead-up to the feeding of the 5,000, Matthew narrates in Matthew 14:14, when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Jesus felt the pain of those who were hurting and did what he could for the people he came into contact with to help them and lift them up. Question. Read Isaiah's prophecy in Matthew 12, verses 15 to 21. In what ways do Isaiah and Matthew identify what Jesus was doing as something larger than healing a few or even 100 sick people? Matthew 12, verses 15 through 21. But when Jesus knew it, he withdrew from there, and great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all. Yet he warned them not to make him known, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, Behold, my servant, whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he will declare justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel nor cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and smoking flax he will not quench, till he sends forth justice to victory, and in his name Gentiles will trust. Ellen White writes in The Desire of Ages, page 406, Every miracle that Christ performed was a sign of his divinity. He was doing the very work that had been foretold of the Messiah. But to the Pharisees, these works of mercy were a positive offence. The Jewish leaders looked with heartless indifference on human suffering. In many cases, their selfishness and oppression had caused the affliction that Christ relieved. Thus his miracles were to them a reproach. So to finish today, Jesus' healing miracles were acts of compassion and justice. But in all cases they were not an end in and of themselves. Ultimately, all that Christ did was for the purpose of leading people to eternal life, as we see in John 17, verse 3, And this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. You have been listening to a reading of the Adult Sabbath School Bible Study Guide by Dr. Percy Harold from Queensland, Australia. This service is brought to you by Hope Channel, the Sabbath School Department, and Christian Services for the Blind. Remember, God is always faithful.